Welcome to Teacher's Log, Video 5, and this one is called Tempo Tracks and Mind Train. And how that evolved is in someone's lesson. We were talking about how to get greater flow. Many times you'll hear teachers say, move the air through the horn. And oftentimes they'll say, make sure you're thinking of rhythm, make sure you have a tempo going on. And I was trying different things with this particular student to try to integrate a few things to get the one thing to happen. Because one thing takes a few things in order for it to happen. And this thought came to me with how to keep something moving to the degree that a flow starts to appear. And there's a real sense of direction. And everyone, because of the way they think, might grab on to different words that do different things to them. And so my thoughts at a particular point in the lesson said, look, rhythm are like the train tracks. You set up a metronome and you hear a steady tempo, let's say like that. And how can you keep the flow? Because notice there's one snap and another snap, and we can say, well, that's silence. Well, yes. It's also called space. And that space doesn't mean nothing is going on. As a matter of fact, in order to keep the flow, obviously, I know this is going to sound very obvious, the air has to continue through the clicks. Otherwise, we would have separate notes. If we're going, now that's obvious that I was articulating, because in order for the sound to appear in that sequence, I'd have to articulate each note or fill those gaps with one note or fill those gaps with other rhythms. So this feeling of filling the gaps with a continuum of air, first, obviously, starts in the mind. It has to be through volition, through will, that we keep that continuum. Because there's one thing to start the air and you hear the upfront articulation and everything goes da, and then sometimes with many students I found, and people who aren't students, there can be a relaxation that happens after the initial input of air to create the first articulation. Support is not dropping that momentum. And so the thought came to me, well, for example, in a tempo like this, with those spaces in between, it's like train tracks. And our sound, or our mind, first, propels the air similar to a train going down tracks. And so certain imagery can really work for people, but that image stuck in my mind of our mind train, which is propelling our air to move down these tracks of tempo. And we fill that in by the continuous movement going from one click to the next click to the next click. So this obviously has a lot to do with really the first overlay mechanics, meaning the basics of having a phrase or playing with direction. So when we go limp in our mind, physically our air will subtly go limp, and certainly the direction of the line will go limp. And some people want to play with such a relaxed fullness in sound and don't want to push the sound out of a certain comfortable, nice, rich, full resonance that sometimes the feeling of momentum is lost. And phrasing, movement and direction, the first basics of phrasing, can happen on one note. And that's why sometimes when I'm practicing what people would consider to be long tones, I'm usually putting some subtle articulations into it. Sometimes for a variety of reasons, but sometimes make sure there's that natural feeling of momentum. And then without, I keep that idea moving through the line. Now, where this gets interesting is when we have something to say, really have something to say. There's a momentum. Something's moving us to say what we need to say. Now, you can think of many circumstances, right? That would be the case. Someone says something to you and you don't agree with it, and they keep at it, for example, and you start to get a little agitated or really feel that there's a need for another view to come into this instead of this train coming at you from what they're saying in this hypothetical, to equalize the pressure that's coming at you. So there's a need for this momentum to come through you. And we can think of all sorts of life scenarios that do that. Well, music is a communication. And when we're playing, just thinking, well, this is something pretty that we like to play, that's fine. Whatever feels good for a person. Sometimes in myself, well, not just sometimes, that's an understatement. I use my instrument for devotional purposes. And if I really need to say something, I will communicate that, always through my instrument. There's some form of communication. That communication can be as a cry for help. That communication could be prayer or other sentiments and gratitude. Something wants to communicate. In me, there's a need to communicate what's going on in me through music. And sometimes that communication can become a very direct transmission. And since today happens to be November 17th, I don't know whether this video will be up or not. Today, probably not. But is the birthday, the 26th birthday of the Frequency Band. And the Frequency Band always played every performance every time we're playing. It's a communication, but foremost it's a transmission. So if you think of transmission, there's a relationship to something that has direction, that has a destination. Therefore, it's traveling. So transmitting is a form of traveling to a place that you're directing to a specific destination. So, rhythm can be looked at, or tempo can be looked at as the train tracks for which your mind train can direct your physiology, which of course is being, in essence, propelled by the musical communication and transmission. So it has a very basic situation, obviously going on, with wanting to keep things flowing. How to keep that things flowing? First of all, there's direction, there's momentum. Music, even when it's quiet, is moving. It's always moving. So in a communication, transmission, of course there's movement. In traveling, of course there's movement. So that's basically it, but I'm going to play a little something. Transmission towards the hand that made it all true.